We are live. Welcome everyone to today's discussion on the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence final report, the report's recommendations and its prospects for implementation. We appreciate everybody for joining us today. The NSCAI has been working the last 2+ years to make recommendations to the President and Congress on how to advance the development of AI for national security and defense of the United States. Today, we have with us the Executive Director of the NSCAI, Eli Bajraktari. As I said, he's been working from the very beginning. He helped stand up the commission itself. Previously, he was a research fellow at NDU. And then prior to joining NDU, Eli worked as the Chief of Staff to the National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. Prior to working at the White House, Eli served for 3 years in a variety of leadership roles, including for the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Robert Work, where he and I met and worked together for 3 years. Also with us today is Chuck Howell. He's Chief Scientist for Responsible AI at MITRE, focused on adapting tools and techniques from high assurance systems engineering and from various risk management frameworks to apply to consequential AI, particularly machine learning systems. Also, we have Dr. Mikel Rodriguez. He's the director of MITRE Labs Artificial Intelligence Autonomy Innovation Center. And he also leads the Joint AI Center's AI Red Team for DoD. And if you like today's topic and it interests you and you want to hear more about the NSCAI report as well, we invite you to tune into the MITRE Grand Challenges event on April 8th, which will focus on advancing fairness in AI adoption. And will feature a discussion with the NSCAI's Jessica Young on the specific audit and oversight recommendations from this report. A link to register for that event will be shared in the chat. And I highly encourage everyone to check it out as they have some great speakers lined up. All right, to kick things off, we're gonna turn things over to Eli, and he's gonna begin with some opening remarks, and then we're gonna launch right into a roundtable discussion, as I said, on the Commission's work, the final report recommendations, the potential for implementation, and also some of the work MITRE has done in support of the Commission's work. So please, Eli, go ahead.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. First of all, I would like to thank MITRE for putting this event together. I think I'm among a group of friends. I'm probably online the least knowledgeable person about AI when I sit down next to Chuck, Greg, and Mikel. So it's a personal honor to be among friends. Greg, I've known you for years. I admire your passion, your insights and intellect, and thanks for inviting us today. As I said, MITRE has been a phenomenal supporter from day one, either by detailing personnel like Chuck. Mikel has been part of the team, I feel, from day one, and you, Greg, also contributed heavily on some of the most critical chapters of our final report. So thank you, guys. Thank you for being such a good partner in this. And we truly benefited by having you guys produce this 759-page document that I just gave to Chuck so he can use it as a pillow. But let me quickly give you an overview of the report. As you know, and as you mentioned, Greg, United States Congress understood 2 years ago that we need to do something with regard to AI because we were losing competitive edge against a formidable country, China in this case. We were not organized, and there was not a belly button or a strategy that was driving this technology in our system. And so they created a commission. They picked 15 commissioners. These were individuals, technologists, national security professionals, business executives, and academic leaders. What we did in the last 2 years, we've consulted with a range of experts like yourself, inside and outside the government. We received countless briefings, both classified and unclassified. And then we produced this comprehensive report, which I like to say that it's the national security document on artificial intelligence. I'd like to also make it clear that our commission's mandate was really clear from the beginning. We were not AI for Humanity commission. We were a commission that had to explore and find ways and identified means for our country to adopt faster AI for national security purposes. In other words, what can our departments and agencies do with AI to advance our national security interests? So our mandate was real clear from the Congress, and that was our driving guide for the last 2 years. You mentioned the final report. I will just say that we came up with two strong judgments for the final report. One is our government is not organized or resourced to win the technology competition against a committed competitor, nor it is prepared to defend against the AI-enabled threats that I've learned so much here from Chuck in terms of what is the really in today's world AI-enabled threats, right? Second is our nation must be ready by 2025 to defend and compete in the coming era of AI accelerated competition and conflict. And we can talk more about what does that AI 2025 mean really in this context. If you read all the document, there are 4 pillars for actions that we have to undertake to remain an AI leader, in the coming decade or so. First, leadership. As we all know, leadership matters. So we need to be organized for this kind of competition. We need the White House to drive the prioritization and coordination of policies and activities. As we all know, after World War II, we created the National Security Council to help us address the Soviet Union problem. After the end of the Cold War, we created the National Economic Council. And so we argue in our report that it is time to set up a Technology Competitiveness Council at the White House to win the technology competition. This TCC, the Technology Competitiveness Council, would be an ad hoc coordinating body chaired by the Vice President that would help bring all the departments and agencies really coordinate strategies and resources and provide a clear guidance on how you win this technology competition. Second, and this comes out throughout our report, is talent. Talent in the AI competition is a secret sauce. And this is the one thing I've learned by working with Mikhail and his team is that we have not a lot of people that are really on the cutting edge of the latest AI, conversation and capability. We have a huge talent deficit. And so we address this in several ways. One is we need to build new talent. We need to expand existing programs in government to bring these kind of talent. We want still to remain the world magnet for AI talent. And finally, we need to cultivate talent in the United States. And so the talent piece is really dominant in our report. And we can talk later about some radical ideas that I say in how you can increase these kind of talent pipelines, both inside the government, but also nationwide. Third pillar of our report is related to hardware. Initially, I was really reluctant to actually expand on the issue of hardware, but thanks to some of the commissioners who insisted that AI needs to be looked holistically through the AI stack, and hardware plays a really dominant place there, we expanded and we read our mandate much broadly than we should have. And so we have a chunk of our recommendations evolve around what to do with hardware. I don't have to tell this crowd, but we are 110 miles from losing access to the vast majority of the cutting-edge microelectronics which power our companies and military. And I'm talking about TSMC, which is located in Taiwan, 110 miles from China. So we need to revitalize domestic semiconductor manufacturing and ensure, as we say in our report, that we maintain 2 generations ahead in semiconductors over China. The last piece the last pillar in our report evolves around innovation. We need to sustain and increase investments in AI research to set the conditions for accessible domestic AI innovation and drive the breakthroughs to win the technology competition. Access to the latest and greatest AI tools is expensive, so we recommended establishing a national AI research infrastructure where universities, individuals, small companies have access to these tools that are readily available now primarily at the biggest AI companies in the country. And then the second portion of the AI innovation really evolves around how we continue to double the federal investments in AI R&D so that by 2026, we reach $32 billion annually. I would miss if I don't mention that there are 2 themes that cut across all these pillars. One is partnerships between private and public sector that is critical in how we emerge as a leader and continue to lead in that space. And the second thing is partnerships with our old and new allies. So we looked at what can we do more with NATO, EU, Five Eyes, but also we looked at what can we do more with countries that have really developed and are at the cutting edge of this kind of emerging tech, like India, Israel, and Scandinavian countries. Lastly, we placed a huge effort, and Chuck was one of the leading in this space of like, how can we use these kind of technologies? How can we develop them, and how can we field them in an ethical and responsible manner? And we have like 2 chapters dedicated, in addition to we talking in variety of chapters about this issue, but we've placed a huge importance on, like, there's a lot of sensitivity about how you develop and field these kind of capabilities, whether for law enforcement purposes domestically or for military operations abroad. So we placed a heavy emphasis on the ethical and responsible use of AI. I'll stop there, Greg, because I know, and I'm sitting on a group of panelists that know much more about this, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But thank you again for having us, guys, today. We're really excited. It's been 4th week since we launched the report, and there's a lot of enthusiasm about the report. So we're spending a lot of time socializing, providing context, background to how we came to the conclusions we came. And so I truly appreciate you guys giving us an opportunity today to do the same with your audience.
Thanks, Ely. Thanks for that summary. And I would really recommend to people, please do read this report. It's amazing in its comprehensiveness, and it really does provide a lot of insight, not only to where we are in terms of AI development, but also answering a lot of the questions of what our country needs to do to accelerate AI adoption across the US government, but particularly in the national security sector. Let me begin by, let me just quickly to you, Chuck and Mikkel, could you briefly just explain what role each of you played in this report's development and the commission's work?
Sure. I was originally sort of supporting primarily the line of effort 6, which is the responsible AI and ethics line of effort. I also did some cross-cutting work and worked with Mike Garris, who's the chief technical advisor for the commission, for the staff. So my primary focus was on the aspects of assurance and ethical or responsible adoption, but I got a chance. It's an incredibly collegial and cooperative group, so there were no hard lines between the lines of effort. So everybody pitched in, everybody compared notes, and so I had a great opportunity. It was a real privilege just to see how the other topics were evolving, but primarily focused on the responsible AI and ethics line of effort.
Thanks, Chuck. Mikkel?
I would say I mostly play the role of a friend of the commission, and I would say every time I had the pleasure, an opportunity to engage with the team, it's just honored that we have folks of that caliber writing this report. So mostly just a fan, and so happy to see the end product, and grateful for what they come up with.
Thanks,
Greg, can I just add one thing? So
please.
You and I and Mikkel and Chuck, we have worked on many projects in DC. This project was really unique because I have never seen so much positive energy to help out. Whether they were universities or FFRDCs, we reached out to everybody, and everybody would, like, drop everything to provide us with papers, people. I mean, Mikkel did a training for us one day, all day long, just to, help us educate on what is AI. But I'm telling you, and I think the reason was that everybody understood the importance of this technology, what can our country benefit by really getting this technology right in terms of economic, social well-being, and ultimately national security domain. But also, I think everybody knew where China is going with this, the amount of resources they're putting, the amount of dedication they have, the top-down leadership they have towards this kind of a technology. And so I think that moment, Bob Ward likes to say that this is now our Sputnik moment, that, this report can serve maybe as a wake-up call that we have to move, and we have to move out aggressively. But I'm telling you, we were so thankful that we were able to benefit from this really generous energy around this, because I'm telling you, I've never seen a more positive energy around anything in DC than in this project.
It's great to hear. In regard to what you just said, Ely, the competitive aspect of artificial intelligence. A few years ago, China's President Xi He said, quote him, he said, "A new technological and industrial revolution is brewing. A global revolution in military affairs is accelerating, and the pattern of international military competitions is experiencing historic changes." When you know the US dominated the last military technical revolution, which was based on precision guided munitions, advanced sensors, stealth technology, and accelerated battle management systems. Now we face a new military technological revolution, and in part driven by AI. Ely, let me ask you to begin with, who is winning this current military technical competition?
Greg, that is a really good question, because we also initially struggled with like how you actually compare this. You know, this is a difficult issue to compare, but we took a chapter from Andrew Moore's, one of our commissioners, former professor at Carnegie Mellon, now with Google AI, in which he analyzes AI from a stack perspective. And so he says, you know, so we compared United States and China's AI stack, and we came up with some kind of a conclusion here of where are we versus them in this AI stack. We obviously compared us and China because we believe these are the two world leaders in AI. And while we still think we have the lead, I got to tell you, and this will sound nothing new to you, Greg, is that our lead is evaporating. And so, as I said, we compared 6 components of the AI stack: hardware, data, algorithms, applications, talent, and the ability to integrate across all the other 5 areas. So in a nutshell, we believe that we have the greater capabilities in AI-related hardware, and this is the semiconductor piece that we can talk later more in detail, the algorithms, because our companies still continue to produce the best algorithms in the world, and talent, because our universities and private companies still attract the best world talent. But I gotta tell you, Beijing has advantages in data for obvious reasons, applications, which we have seen lately, and integration capabilities. As we've discussed this morning or today, the Beijing leadership is aggressively attempting to obtain leadership in all 6 portions of the AI stack. So they have strategy, they have resources dedicated. At what time, if they double, and they're doubling down on the existing advantages. So eventually they might take overall leadership in AI. Right now we call it a draw because we lead in 3 aspects of the AI stack and they lead on the 3 aspects of AI stack. But given how aggressively they're pursuing, you know, advantages in other areas, you know, this lead will soon be diminished.
Thanks, Ely. Mikhail or Chuck, anything to add?
I guess I would just say, I mean, if you look at there's a couple things. On the one hand, you see China seems to be really organized and kind of resourced and determined to win this particular competition. And they have, in some sense, a head start in that back, I think it was 2017 when they established a very clear set of AI goals with, measurable objectives. And they also have kind of their approach, which is kind of more centrally directed. You could argue, and there are some advantages in the sense that, AI tends to benefit from these like large data sets and, lots and lots of money, and just kind of the way America is organized is different. And if you look at there's indication that kind of China's been all in on military AI applications specifically, and I think that's something that you could see as a pro. Now on our hand, I think that, I completely agree with what Ely said in the sense that what you could see, there's almost like this Cambrian explosion of like companies and applications of AI, but under the hood, if you look at it, there's not so much actually diversity in AI systems. That a lot of it is kind of, repurposing of handful of kind of innovations, and a lot of those are still happening in the US.
Thanks.
I'd add, so I wouldn't pretend to be a geopolitical strategist and foresee how things are going in great power competition, but I will. One thing that I learned a great deal about during this commission is the degree to which it's not just a pure head-to-head comparison. China is making use of AI in ways that we probably wouldn't even conceive of doing or be willing to do. So there's the obvious example of the surveillance state against the Uyghurs, but also micro-targeting, collecting enormous amounts of disparate data from a lot of different sources, both legally and illegally gathered, and then getting really high precision information about American citizens from which they can do blackmail or targeting ops or anything like that, to a degree that is astonishing in terms of just the ability of machine learning to support that. On the other hand, seeing the glass as 20% full rather than 80% empty, I do think that China's race to adopt has sort of the same theme of Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. And I think in military applications and intelligence applications, in the report, there's a quote from the basketball coach John Wooten: "Move fast, but don't hurry." And I think that the U.S. Sometimes can seem at a disadvantage because we do place an emphasis on working with allies, which adds viscosity. We don't just command all of industry to do something, which adds delay and viscosity. And we place a premium on making sure that the systems are robust, predictable, reliable. But in the long run, I think that will pay huge advantages. So I'm an optimist.
Thanks. The commission's final report says that the U.S. government must elevate AI from the technical to the strategic level. It also says, as you've all mentioned, that China's organized resources are determined to win the technology competition. Now, we know the United States has an aversion to large-scale government-funded programs. It seems that China seems to have adopted our Cold War model of innovations being driven in part by government. But you talk a lot in the report about how the U.S. government should better organize to win this competition. And let me start with you, Willie. Can you explain more the organizational aspect of your recommendations, including you had mentioned the Technological Competition Council and also the steering committee at DoD, please?
Thanks, Greg. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think when you talk about AI and other emerging technologies, really this needs to be top-driven. It needs to have a clear strategy and clear resources allocated to be, like top-driven. So we need a clear strategy. I hope and I wish that our document, it's 759 pages, provides some kind of a blueprint for that kind of a strategy. So when we were discussing these issues, there are pockets of excellence among departments and agencies in DC and across the nation. You have JAIC at DoD, you have AIM at the IC, you have FFRDCs like you guys. They're doing a lot of these things. But these are still, islands of hope among, our federal government. So what we needed to connect them with some kind of a top-down leadership that drives not just these islands of hope, but connects them and drives departments writ large. So the TCC model was based, as I said, on the need of today's world, where technology really compared, in a competition with China, is a dominant force. They understood this, and that's why they're doing everything possible to get ahead of us by investing and by moving out aggressively. I still feel that in our system, technology is secondhand, and people that work on technologies are still secondhand citizens, that they don't have a dominant voice in the conversations around national security issues. So we need to bring technologies with national security professionals closer together. And this happens only if you have a top-down approach where cabinet secretaries are brought together by the vice president, and they are given a clear guidance on how to act on all issues related to emerging tech, if it's 5G or AI or quantum or biotech. All these issues need to be elevated at the cabinet level, at the vice president's level. When we talk about the Department of Defense, and Greg, you and I have been there, and you have led one of the most critical issues that for Bob work in terms of the third offset. If it's not top-driven from the top, that the components and services will still do their own thing. We were struck really when we had Secretary of Defense Esper. He came and spoke to our conference after the first 6 months, and he said AI is one of his top 3 priorities, the others being hypersonics and direct energy. But when you looked at the entire DoD and their budget, that was still not reflective of Secretary's priorities. And so we thought you need a mechanism that sort of like monitors that. The Secretary of Defense cannot be that guy that monitors the implementation of his priorities. You need at the deputies level and the vice chairman's level, somebody that drives this and moves strategy and prioritization into resources. And from your experience and my experience, having the PPDNI, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense driving this top-down infusion of technologies, prioritization of technologies, and then putting it into operational concepts, with a clear understanding of what the threat is and how the competitor is moving. That kind of a coordination was instrumental during your time in terms of moving ahead in terms of the third offset strategy. And again, signaling to the services and components that this matters. And this has to be front central as you develop operational concepts, as you develop war games, and as you deploy troops.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's been, there'll be 4 years this month that Bob Work signed out a memo standing up, establishing the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, which became Project Maven, because he was convinced DoD needed to do more and move faster to develop and integrate AI and machine learning.
Greg, can I add one thing about the 2025 goal, because I think it dovetails nicely. So how we came, everybody asked why we came with a 2025 goal. So I think it was just a natural evolution of everything we've been hearing. We had commissioners that come from private sector who are, in their mind, setting goals, achieving those goals is fundamental in how those companies evolve. In our world, and Greg, you will appreciate this, I was out of this world for about 2 years. 5 years ago, as you said, we were talking about all these, incredible things. When I returned and I had to lead this team, the same issues were discussed. How can we bring talent faster into government? How can we bridge the gap between Silicon Valley and DoD? Yes, DIU made a lot of effort. Yes, the conversation moved, but we still had the same issues confronting us. So I said, and commissioners, really foot stomp this, is that we need a clear goal, that we need to be AI ready by 2025. And what we mean by that is that we should not be talking about this anymore by 2025. We need to move now, that by 2025, AI should be everywhere. Whether or not it's how we move talent faster into the government, whether or not everything you do inside DoD has some kind of an AI enabled or is enabled by, but we should not be talking anymore about this. You were right. 5 years ago, Bob Work launched the first probably AI algorithm inside the department. And look at, Maven still remains one of the most dominant Pathfinder projects. And so this needs to be scaled. And by 2025, our commissioners hope that AI is in the background of everything we do, from business operations all the way to how the warfighters use technology.
And that's a great point you make about the absolute imperative to have a top-down driven innovation in the department, because unless you have people at the top who can champion these programs, who have the ability to move resources around, nothing will ever happen. I'm convinced of that. But you also, and this is, I think, the tricky piece, is that you also have to have that bottom-up innovation. And how do you think? What's a good mechanism to kind of unite those two, that they meet and work together?
So, Greg, as you know, I always tell this anecdote of the first meeting we had on third offset, where everybody had to show up because the deputy and the vice and the PPD and I called the first meeting. So they had to show up because the second most powerful person in the Department of Defense is calling for a meeting. And you remember, you had a lot of skeptical faces. People didn't understand what this is about. But I think what I give credit to Bob Work and Admiral Winnefeld and Stephanie O'Sullivan is that they understood where the trends are going. They understood that the trends are not good, that the direction is not positive, and we got to do something. And then you remember, as the time was evolving, that skepticism was disappearing because people started to believe, and not only at the top leadership, but we were traveling the country, and if you remember, you had 05s, 06s coming forward and saying that what we're saying, people truly want to implement. And and so that's when you say, what I think is you gotta push a culture of thinking differently, and that culture becomes majority of people thinking that way and believing that way. I think that's when you see change started to happen. And I think you have this spot, the Islands of Hope, as I mentioned earlier. Each of the services have some kind of an AI related super project that is really good, but you need to scale them and combine them with a top-down support, because otherwise they will not last long.
Yeah. And Mikhail, let me ask you, you've worked quite a bit with the Jake. How do you see it? How do you see kind of better fomenting that connection there, that connective tissue, if you will, but between the engines of innovation working in the Pentagon and that senior leadership who's willing to throw resources at these programs?
Yeah, from my vantage point, I think that most AI progress in the U.S. should probably still kind of remain in the private sector and universities. There are still some areas that are very unique to the kind of IC and DoD that a lot of the labs are focused on, national labs and FFRDCs. But we probably, so we probably shouldn't lose this bottom-up, approach. It's kind of infused with that whole kind of, startup mentality. But I think what I was excited to see in the report is that recognition that this kind of fully distributed approach is not necessarily working in winning this kind of strategic competition when it comes to AI. So if even like a big organization like Google, for example, can't necessarily like stand up to kind of the resourcing that China is placing on this front. So I think that it's probably right on to think about some kind of hybrid approach where you're kind of meshing government and private sector efforts. And we've seen that work really nicely in my little, AI is a big field, and there's a lot of amazing things going on. From kind of my kind of small vantage point, we've seen that work really nicely in areas like machine learning security, right, where you see industry collaborating very closely with national labs, FRDCs, government, DoD. So there are some promising areas where that's happening nicely, where there's a lot of technical creativity, and it's a combination, that hybrid approach is working nicely.
Yeah, you touch on an interesting point. I was talking recently with a former DoD official who was heavily involved with AI and the JAIC, and he was talking about some kind of a private-public organizational model, and if there's a way to bring in a commercial company with all of its resources, including people and technology, and in essence become an extension of something like the JAIC without proprietary ownership requirements, and be paid commensurate with what they get outside the department. Do you think a model such as that might actually work?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's one of the things that we're challenged by, and I don't think it's going to change in anytime soon, is that is the talent piece that Yuli was talking about. And in this case, we had like these fits and starts, and early days, it was fascinating to be part of Project Maven, to see some of the kind of challenges, and for example, working with some of the Google engineers. So I think that getting one of the I think what a key component in this kind of hybrid approach is going to be also to kind of establish those kind of shared and kind of collaborative areas where we can kind of build out together with industry, because I don't think it's going to be possible to necessarily overnight have an army of kind of machine learning engineers in government. And I don't think that we necessarily even need that, right? You might just need a small cadre that understands the gaps and helps you illuminate some of the areas that we need to either invest R&D or develop novel and exciting concepts of operation using kind of maturing machine learning technology.
Yeah, and you bring up a key issue there, the talent piece, and there's obviously a dynamic competition underway in the private sector for AI talent, for data scientists and real experts. And you have a lot of recommendations in this report on how to fix that talent piece. And Ely, maybe you could talk for a moment to some of these. How does the U.S. government get those talented people to come work for us instead of, say, going to Facebook?
Yeah, Greg. So great question. There are multi dimensions to the talent piece. One is we have a deficit in the homegrown talent. People still don't find STEM that compelling, and so we have to increase the numbers on the domestic side. When you look at the number of graduates on computer science last year, we had 430,000 job openings only last year in computer science, with only 73,000 people graduating from computer science. And so it's the numbers speak for itself. And then just add on top of that that the AI field is even much more competitive, right? And so what we recommend is, I'm not going to focus on like the K through 12 piece, but like how do you increase the talent pipeline for government? So we have several recommendations. One is you already have talent inside the government. You have to manage it better. And so either you create career fields with both military and civilians. There are technologists from day one until the end of their careers. And so they are managed differently and they're not, shifted around every 2 to 3 years. So that's one piece. The second piece is we recommend establishing the United States Digital Service Academy. This is a university based on the military university models that would produce career civil servant technologists after they spend 4 years in the university. Then you can field them in different federal government agencies and departments. I think the number we recommend is you start and you would get the output of about 500 a year of technologists that are, their curriculum is really STEM heavily in nature, and they owe government 5 years of service after they graduate. And then the third piece is when you look at the military services, the National Reserve Corps that we have, the Military Reserve Corps is really a good model of, how can you find technologists in Silicon Valley and throughout America that are willing to work less than 40 days a year for government. They don't want to quit their job, but they want to become part of something bigger, something that has a mission and a mandate. And we recommend creating the National Reserve Digital Corps. This would be a body that you can tap into, and these will be technologies that will be called on to a different mission for federal government. They would work 38 days a year as part of the, their status would be special government employees. And we think, that kind of a pipeline would further offer government access to the talented pool that exists, throughout the country of individuals who, as I said, they want to help the country, but they don't want to leave their jobs in their current form. So we have a lot of recommendations, Greg. And as I said, the 759 pages is not just wave top recommendations. We just don't say, let's fix the talent pipeline. We provide clear guidance of how you go about and do that. And that's why we have these blueprints for actions, because if you want to create an academy, we have a detailed proposal how you do it in a 3-year timeline. And then all these recommendations we've been talking today, we have legislative language. If Hill wants to take action, how much would it cost, and what they need to use as a language on a bill, on an NDAA, or anything they need to set in motion these recommendations. So I highly recommend to people online to review this, because the report is really very detailed in nature.
You mind if I just add one aspect to that? And it ties to Mikhail's observation that certainly for the foreseeable future, the majority of innovation and depth is going to be in the private sector. And it was talking about how do we address some of that? There's a phrase in the report that will be familiar to those of you who worked with Bill LaPlante when he was at MITRE, that the government needs to own the technical baseline. And in particular, on these kinds of technology adoption challenges, that the government has to have a sufficient cadre of people who really understand what the current state of the art is, which is changing daily. What's possible, what's not possible, what's just unobtainium. What are the key boundary conditions to put in place around an acquisition or development? And so there's sort of a force multiplier there, where the government owns the technical baseline, has sort of technical parity with with industry and academia, but is using industry and academia to develop and to come up with creative solutions. You don't want to over constrain it. So I think as different the different approaches that Ilya was talking about increase the technical bench in the government, that's a great way to leverage that so.
Thanks, Chuck. Let me steer a little towards let's call it the more pointy end of the spear. The report says that warfighters cannot change the way they fight without also changing the way they think, particularly about emerging technologies. And there's many facets to that, but the challenges of adopting and integrating emerging technologies are well known. In fact, I was just recently reading a book on fighter pilots in the post-Vietnam era, and it was talking about their struggles with electronic warfare and just conceptualizing that. In fact, they said that they hated using electronic countermeasures because it was a invisible electron shooting back and forth, and the pilots never knew how they were actually doing in terms of what impact or effect that was having. And I think you remember we've sat in senior leader war games where they're reluctant to even use to deploy or think about deploying cyber weapons because nobody knows how to verify impact or what impact it will have. Now, how is this going to work with artificial intelligence, and how are you seeing the warfighters themselves receive this or embrace this emerging technology? Are they able to contextualize and understand how it provides a value added and what the impacts of it are on the future battlefield?
So I'll just say my observation from a distance, I guess, is that the challenge is more how do we stop holding them back? How do we keep up? The folks who are on the pointy end of the spear are likely the folks who are digital natives and completely are at home with conceptualizing algorithms that are recommending videos, and they live in that environment, and I think they can make the translation very quickly to how that will help them do their job or help them prevail. I think that it's all the behind them kinds of bureaucracy and infrastructure kinds of challenges that Ely was referring to that are really more of the problem. I think it's to some extent a generational thing, but there's enormous interest and appetite and I think skill in the armed services at the sort of pointy end of the spear level.
I resonate with that. I've seen. I probably going to botch the quote, but I remember, for example, when General Shanahan was running Project Maven, he talked about it's not about changing the culture; it's really about unleashing the culture. In the sense that I've seen firsthand people be very creative about almost developing these novel concepts of operation with machine learning. That it's not perfect, it's creating, it has still problems and making mistakes, but then seeing how people developed on the fly these workflows that use this is fascinating. So I resonate with Chuck's point.
Great, thanks. Chuck, let me direct this one to you. We hear a lot of talk about how and the report itself says the U.S. government can responsibly use technology to protect the American people and our interests. There is rarely any disagreement that AI should be responsibly developed and deployed in accordance with ethical principles. But does the final report go beyond general encouragement of responsible use to get to concrete steps that individual agencies should take?
No. Yes, that's the whole focus and key. Is there was no debate about, well, what would the right principles be, or let's debate a little more about what we mean by ethical and responsible. Stipulate those as a given. How do we operationalize it? And so, as Ely mentioned, there are the 16 chapters, including a chapter very specifically on establishing justified confidence in these AI systems, and a second distinct chapter on making sure that adoption of these systems preserves privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights. But then there are these implementation blueprints for implementation further in the document that have much more concrete details about what steps need to be taken and what the key barriers and key mitigators to those barriers are. And then in the back of the volume, there's an abridged version of what we call key considerations, which are a really very detailed sort of cafeteria of specific steps that need to be taken to sort of both ensure that the systems are being developed responsibly, and as important, ensure that others can make a reasonable judgment that that's the case. And that is very, very detailed. And in fact, one of the things that we've had some conversations about is it can seem daunting. How do I establish justified confidence in this really high consequence, complex system? And you can get paralyzed. So we've talked about what's the minimum viable product. What's a small number of steps that are fairly low-hanging fruit, not radical new research that's needed, that could absolutely improve both the development of the system and other people's justified confidence in that system. We also identify research gaps. It's not all just pick up and use it. There are some just things we have to burn down the risk on. We don't know how to do yet. So it covers the spectrum, but all of those are identified. And in fact, there are several different organizations that are now taking the key considerations and taking some of the recommendations and are literally piloting them and intend to give feedback on, you missed this, this was great, you never thought of this, this you need to change a little bit. So the entire focus was on operationalizing principles rather than relitigating.
That's great. And Mikhail, I wanted to ask this one of you. I know you've done a lot of work on adversarial AI. And the commission report says defending against AI capable adversaries without employing AI is an invitation to a disaster. It also says that the idea of protecting AI systems has been an afterthought in engineering and fielding AI systems. Can you explain a little bit about adversarial AI and why we need to take that more seriously perhaps than we have?
Yeah, so this is still kind of an evolving space, but what we're finding is that, along with the many opportunities and, kind of bright futures that machine learning and AI brings, there also comes with a whole set of new challenges, to include kind of a bigger umbrella of assurance of how do I make sure that as I field these things into mission critical context that they behave as they ought to. But then in the context of national security, we can't forget that there is also kind of an adversarial component. So there's going to be, just like we had, I like the book that you were talking about, the kind of EW, Greg, just like we had this technology, you have jammers that came up. So you're going to have an offensive component to this. So we're already seeing, interesting developments in the area of kind of counter AI, which is kind of an evolving vulnerability space that you look at. How can you, counter the deployment and fielding of these systems? And it turns out that it's very challenging to secure these AI systems against counter AI attacks. Everything at the data layer, you could do things like poisoning, all the way when you fielded a system, knowing very little about it, you could jam it or counter it. So this is an area that, the National Commission on AI has been very kind of forward-leaning and making some pretty bold recommendations about kind of a national level effort. There's pockets, and this is an area where there's a lot of great collaboration, like I mentioned before, with kind of industry, IC and DoD. They've kind of catalyzed a joint approach that I think is very encouraging. But the report here is really talking about how you scale that out to a national level, and it's exciting to see that.
Thanks. Let me direct this question for all three of you. Maybe you could touch a little bit on what are a couple of things that surprised you either during the development of the final report or in the report itself. Maybe begin with Ely.
Well, Greg, I think I mentioned the first one. I was really surprised by the energy and the level of willingness from people, from private sector to help us. When General Shanahan launched Jake, we had a lot of conversation about, Silicon Valley was coming after the Snowden, episode, and there was a lot of reluctance to work with DoD and government. And, like every time Eric speaks publicly, he's asked about Maven and why Google decided not to work with Maven. But in the last 2 years, I got to tell you, the dynamic has changed and the narrative has changed. And I think, China helped there a lot. The treatment of their minorities and the use of technology also contributed to like putting, a real face on what their goal is. And at the same time, I think, Silicon Valley started to see that, this is United States Department of Defense. So we gotta help our guys. And, you had a lot of companies coming out publicly stating support for working with government. I mean, even Google at our conference in 2019, said that they will continue to work with government. So I was surprised by, that shift that happened in the last 2+ years, really in that dynamic between Silicon Valley and DC. Obviously, as you know, we had DIU that helped a lot mitigate that and bridge that gap and a lot of other efforts. So that was in my view, one of the surprises that I experienced, which was, for us, it was perfect timing because we were entering, we were beginning this project and this, and then this willingness to help us and support us was really felt throughout the country.
Chuck?
Yeah, two. One sort of a process kind of observation, one a product about some of the final report. I've been really pleasantly surprised from the start, both inside the commission, like we've talked about, but it's both the commissioners and the staff. It's a remarkably collegial, passionate, hardworking, and very curious group in the best sense of people. And so I think there's something about the value of a compelling statement of need and the sense that you can really make a dent. Like, you don't get many opportunities to really make an important dent to help our country. And I think we saw that with industry as well. I think that the way Illy described it is certainly the way that industry and academia reacted. But I think part of that as well was, from the start, the way that they were engaged with was both very open. It wasn't like there was a set of preconceived final recommendations and we just need you to agree with these or flesh them out. So it was outreach that was very open, but also very serious about, we don't have a lot of time. This is really important. We need to get it right. This is your chance to influence this. And I think the combination of sort of that transparency and openness with we have a job to do really helped with that reaction that a lot of times I think commissions and the like don't get. In the product itself, I'm very pleasantly surprised from the start, and it's reflected in the final product, the final report, just how much from the start the notions of responsible development and adherence to our values and preserving privacy, civil liberties, civil rights, et cetera, isn't just sort of a nice spackling on that you put on at the end to make, oh yeah, we thought about that, we're all for being good, but was baked in from the start and is seen as a prerequisite. Without it, we will not succeed. And I think that that both I found surprising. I found I was very happy to see that. I also think that's a sort of a virtuous cycle. I think that tone also makes it easier for industry and academia to engage. So those are the one process, one product surprise.
Thanks, Chuck. Mikhail?
Just that last bit, exactly what Chuck articulated, which is, in my case, from the kind of machine learning, security, and privacy area, people typically will slap that on at the end and say, yeah, but this was not an afterthought. And I was surprised at the boldness and the level of scale at the final recommendation when I read it about this kind of national level of how we infuse kind of our application of AI with, security from the beginning was just very encouraging to see. And so, yep.
Thanks. I know we're getting to the end here. Ely, I wanted to ask, that you've got a lot of recommendations in that final report, also in the reports that preceded that over the last 2 years. I wanted to ask you, how is Congress reacting so far? And if you would, which recommendations would you prioritize?
Great question, Greg. I mean, what we did in 2020, our commissioners decided that we shouldn't wait for the final report because, this is a dynamic technology. Things are moving so fast. So we submitted in 2020, every quarter, a memo to Congress, which was also not short, 200 pages on average, with full range of recommendations on all these issues, right? So I'm happy that Congress really listened to us and served as a great partner. So in FY21, there are already 17 recommendations that they have adopted from our first quarter report. So far, Greg, the response has been really positive. I think there's a lot of energy on the Hill to get this right. There are a lot of the conversation about a China bill. Senator Schumer has a bill on the Hill, Endless Frontier, that touches on a lot of issues we discussed. When I talk to the Hill staffers, I bucket the recommendations into 3 categories. One, that they can help us with those that are related to organizational structures. Everything that needs to be legislated, they can help us. That has to do with moving boxes around in DoD, IC, and other departments and agencies. Second bucket of recommendations have to do with people. We talked a lot about people today. Hill can help there. Whether or not it's creating a new university, whether or not it's creating a digital reserve corps, Hill can legislate this. And there's a lot of energy for, getting the people aspect of this competition right. And then the third bucket of recommendations that I'd say are resources. As Eric Schmidt says, this is not going to be cheap. Building semiconductor fabs in the United States is not going to be cheap. This is a capital-heavy industry that we need to inject a lot of money right now so we can ensure, we are ahead of time when it comes to the chips. So this is not cheap, but I think in the 50s, even President Eisenhower was facing a similar budgetary situation. But because of the Sputnik moment, he decided to double down on investments in S&T and R&D. And that's all the institutions and all the advances we had in a military society, in economic aspect was a fruit of that investment. So I think we're at that point now where we got to inject capital and resources in private sector, academia, and in government to get this going. And then I think the result will show for itself, because I think our country is still the model for innovation. And as Eric says, we just have to keep running faster to outmaneuver and out-innovate our competitors.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I know we're running out of time here, and sorry we weren't able to get to some of these questions. Just to close, Ely, I'd really like to just commend you and the work you've done, and your passion, your infectious passion for protecting our country, for serving our country. You really are a model of public service, and I've worked with you for many years, and I know you've worked with some tough personalities on this commission. These are very high-level people. They demand a lot and they expect a lot in you. And you kept them going on the right path, and you turned out an incredible product with some amazing recommendations. And I think you should be commended. And I want to thank you for what you've done. Chuck and Mikkel, thank you as well for joining us here today. It was great insights. And again, let me just highlight the MITRE Grand Challenge event, where we'll discuss a little more about the NSCAI final report, and that will be on April 8th. And a link to register for that event should be shared in the chat. Again, thank you for all of you for joining us today, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.